My name is Luke McBain. I'm here with Ben Hennessy-Garside. We're talking about the liminal farm in our third session. First session was about what was the liminal farm and what is metaphorical thinking. Second session, we looked a little bit about on liminal space, or we talked about liminal space. What is it? And today we're meeting again and exploring that experience more. What were we doing? What were we creating? Did I give a correct representation of the last two meetings?
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah. Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Well, I keep thinking that I ought to add something, but no, that's fine. That's good.
And today I suggested that, and perhaps it also needs some qualifications. I was thinking about our last two sessions, and I was thinking how you mentioned the subject of persona, which is a term which C.G. Jung developed, invented, coined. And I thought maybe we could go back to that point of C.G. Jung in general and why, referencing C.G. Jung as you did in that particular example could help to understand others what we've been actually doing. And I need to qualify that a little bit just to avoid misunderstandings. It's not like that we sat together in a study group, the four of us, and studied C.G. Jung and all 25 volumes, and then decided to form this group. Not at all. And we didn't
No,
take up on any of his prescriptions or ideas. What we developed was quite unique, I would say. It just happens that for some reason, and maybe we can explore that today a little bit, one can rediscover similar things within what C.G. Jung was writing and talking about. So this is the proposition for today's session. And I know that you're interested in C.G. Jung. I'm interested. I read his books more or less now and then, again and again, and find it very interesting.
Yeah, I am interested in Jung, but in a kind of sort of odd way. So like I haven't read any of his books, so that's the first thing. What I suppose a lot of my information has come from kind of watching podcasts and I suppose it's this noticing the you'll hear a kind of, so this thing about the persona, for example. I think when the reason why I felt it was relevant in the last conversation was because there's something about the way we show up to the world, which feels like it feels like Jung was onto something when he was talking about the persona. This idea that we kind of we have a sense of how we ought to show up, right? Whether we're playing some role, in the sense that we might, when you're at a dinner party and somebody says, "Oh, so what do you do?" And so you say, "Oh, I'm a consultant, or I teach music, or I'm a teacher or a lecturer or a plumber, or and there's this, what comes along with the job title are a bunch of kind of expected behaviors, and the persona can start causing problems when we forget ourselves, because we were talking about remembering, weren't we, in that moment. And we were also talking about carrying, trying to not fall into this trap of doing stuff like we've been doing for the past 12 months on the weekends, and then moving into everyday life like that's the thing, you know, getting retrapped by the persona, and forgetting all this kind of stuff. So yeah, and where we've had the group chat running alongside, that's the other thing that might be worth noting actually, is that we weren't just showing up on Saturdays and having these sessions for a few hours. We were also in contact on a messaging system, and, you know, throwing little quotes and ideas, and when we're mulling over things, recording little things for each other, and passing poems around, and dreams, and some of the stuff I felt inclined to share or talk about was sometimes this Jungian stuff, and you as well, certainly more recently.
I just want to get back to that point of persona, because I think you already described it really well. And I think even somebody who doesn't know what that might mean now has a better understanding of it. And I would take it even a step further, or at least now I understand it better, in a sense that it is even a certain shape we take on, a certain psychological pattern we develop as individuals, to have a, let's say, face to society as a whole, right? It's not just, one part of it is certainly the job and the profession, right? And there it's most obvious if you look at,
yes,
you know, typical uniforms of executives or doctors, that they, you know, display this side of the persona publicly. But it goes further than that. It's a whole psyche which, you know, and part of it is this display of being a certain professional, but it goes also into your private life and your social life. All of that is part of the persona. And I think that's what I learned in our work, that it goes much deeper and it's much broader, and it's much more difficult to grasp, because if you talk to people and they say, okay, well, I have to put on a certain persona or face or attitude when I'm going to work, I think most people will understand that part and will be able to observe that to a certain degree. And where it becomes much more difficult is to say, well, it goes beyond that. It's basically all of your, everything which makes you a part of a social group, and how you display yourself to that social group, be it as a father, mother, son, friend.
Yeah.
It's a very complex patterns of attitudes and behaviors which flows into the persona, and therefore is also very, very, I would say, very difficult to see and to grasp. And even if you have some sort of like superficial understanding about your own character, okay, I'm this sort of person, I'm, you know, impatient, or, you know, I'm, you know, a loving person, or a person who suffers and all that. It's difficult because it's all just, you know, information points. It's not the complete thing.
Yeah.
And what I found astounding is in liminal space and in the metaphorical world, which we developed, the persona was very present and very, very visible. Like it was as if you could, for the first time, I was personally able to really encounter the persona and see it in its completeness, in a reduced way, of course, but in its wholeness. And because it also did re-emerge again and again, so it was very dominant in, you know, in the space it took up. You know, that's sort of like we created a farm situation. We talked about that, and there was this farmer who was a projection of myself, and later on there was an antagonist, which was a projection of myself. And I would say both carry very similar characteristics, and I would say these were characteristics of the persona, quite obviously. Like It's just a way how I would handle myself in any given social situation. And it
Yeah.
doesn't matter if I was the protagonist or the antagonist. They were different, but still they would carry same or similar characteristics, which I would describe to the persona. So this notion, what you have of being sort of entrapped by the persona, it runs very deep. So yeah, I agree to that, yeah, which sounds first a little bit pessimistic as an assessment, that it's, you know, very powerful. We are not really aware of it. It has us more than that we have it.
Yeah.
So, and when you mentioned that, I went back to my memory and I thought, yeah, that is something which obviously was there and I could observe within liminal space for the first time in my life.
Well, that's quite profound. Yeah. Yeah. Because just looking back across the time, and I think I mentioned this last time as well, I noticed changes in the way that you played, which sounds like maybe this is kind of what was going on for you, which is you were noticing this this persona, or one of your personas. I think I have a few trains of thought going on at the same time, so apologies for that. I might skip around a bit, but the one thing I wanted to say was about personas, and that they are kind of useful. Like we have them for reasons.
Mm-hmm.
People like to be able to look at you as a person and be able to pin down you, you know, and I think we kind of intuitively are aware of that, and so we play into it sometimes. Whether that it can become a problem, and where being aware of it in the way that you certainly seem to have done. And I will say as well that there was some of that for me as well. Maybe not as clearly, but there was certainly like gestures that were made, and even things like the items that were present. I found myself carrying a stick around within the world quite a lot. I also found myself, where there was one, for example, if you don't mind me talking about it, where, and this was perhaps a bit later on for you, where you'd shifted away from this character that I think you're talking about. You know, this kind of we came up with a loose name for this persona. I think it was like Jocko McBain, right? It was this kind of like, I'm assuming that's the
Mm-hmm.
is that kind of thing. It wasn't as simple as that one individual character that came up when we were looking at the actors, but and anyway, so one of the things, one of the ways in which that shifted and changed for you was there was this earth merging thing that happened a few times in a few of them, where you would kind of become the earth somehow, which felt to me at least very like a shift. There was less of a thrusting nature to the character. There was more of an acceptance of the world, you know, and an entering into, and almost like a relaxing into, rather than like a, you know, an aggressive kind of attacking motion. And I know that my characters would often not necessarily engage in that. and that there was a kind of resistance to that. And I think I've mentioned in previous ones, I was often quite concerned about the whole group doing a thing together. There was something about me wanting to, within these stories, get us all working together. There's a kind of a communitarian kind of spirit. But then when you guys weren't playing ball with that, because you were doing the thing which that we were all supposed to be doing, which is seeing what happens, something in me would emerge, which was kind of maybe a bit cheeky and a bit tricksterish, and a bit kind of playful, and wanting to make a kind of joke out of everything. And there is some of that in me sometimes. So yeah, I think there is a kind of it's an interesting point that you make, because it's one that I hadn't really clocked until today. This thing about perhaps that is our persona somehow,
or at least a good part of it. At least when you mention that word, it's sort of like it clicked really well for me, because for me the transformational point of being able to transcend or to transform that character within the liminal world was the crisis exercise which we did, right? So it's not really an exercise. I don't know who came up with it, Heather perhaps. Okay, what if this is now the end, right, was the question. And so we went into that mode within those different characters, and basically went into a role play, into a live role play, in which we inhabited, I would argue, the persona, or some projection of ourselves within a certain situation, and started playing those, which is also interesting because you can inhabit that character, right? You can sort of it's like a glove. You sort of like slip into it and you just inhabit that character, and you start playing that character with ease without being an actor at all. And I would argue this is also very unique, that within the metaphorical world, we don't have a problem inhabiting these characters, and we're not actors. And I have worked with plenty of people also within role play situations, and they have really a problem inhabiting other characters. And I'm not surprised, because acting it's a challenge. That's why we have actors. They're able to do that. And we as lay people feel awkward. But within the metaphorical world, there's a fluidity. We can just go into these characters. We can be them. They are us. They're a part of us. So when we did the crisis session, something really extraordinary happened. And because I've tried to wrap my head around that for, I think, a year, because crisis as a cycle is extremely important. As you probably know, I don't know if the viewers know that, but crisis is the opportunity to uncover other aspects of yourself, right? So you might inhabit a certain pattern of behaviors, you might inhabit a certain pattern or number of character traits, and you act on them, and you're successful in them, and you shape your world according to these. But then you sometimes in life you hit a dead end, a wall. That's the crisis. So usually within the crisis, you have certain options. Either you just keep on banging your head against the wall until it breaks, or you give up, or you question yourself and your behavior and your values and everything. And you discover, oh, wow, I'm not just my persona. I'm not just these sets of behaviors. I'm actually capable of something quite different. And the stories and movies are full of those epiphanies, right? So I was always fascinated by crisis, and having experienced myself several crises in my life, I think this is something extremely important. And I was wondering, how can people experience safely a crisis without being in the crisis itself? Because being in an actual crisis is very, very unpleasant. It's very unpleasant. There's a lot of anxiety. It can become it's actually really dangerous for you in terms of your physical, mental health. And I was wondering, well, how do we expose people to crisis without all that danger? Well, in the metaphorical world, you can experience crisis. without the, without the physical or mental implications. And that's what we did. And we went through that crisis in terms of setting ourselves, well, now the farm is coming to an end. Now the sitcom is coming to an end. Now the work of the monks is coming to an end. So it's not going forward. It's not going anywhere anymore. How do our personas, how do our representations act in that situation? And for me, it was just a breakthrough to experience that I could just strip that off. Like I could strip that off and have a totally different experience of exactly the same situation. And that was for me the breakthrough point, and also the letting go point of that particular character, not needing this character anymore to experience that world. So I don't need to be Rocky McBain, and I don't need to be Luke McBain to have a profound experience of what is going on around me, and to make sense of it, to interact with the world, and yeah, to experience also a great degree of joy. So that was for me, and I was just totally blown away that, first of all, you can instill a crisis in the metaphorical world, and it will actually transform you. So it has repercussions also outside of the metaphorical world. You sort of go like, I don't need to be this person. I've seen myself. I don't need to always know the solution to everything.
Yeah.
So that was a long speech, but that's what I thought was interesting, that you could, I mean, we discovered something where you can discover the persona. And not only that, we discovered also something where you can strip it away.
Yeah.
And see what's underneath.
Yeah. There's a lot in what you said there. And I think the first thing I want to do is, I wanted to ask you, just looking back at that, the crisis session that we had, and the monks, I thought your monks, just thought that was brilliant. What all of our monks did was just great. How do you feel about that response to the crisis? Does it feel like if you were to wear a kind of a evaluative, judgmental, not necessarily a negative way, but just like looking at it going, was that good or bad, or right or wrong, or does it, how does it feel, or how did it feel?
Well, it felt as if I was participating in a real crisis. Of course, not at the same intensity of emotional response, but I still, like, I let myself sink into the let's say, the severity of the situation. Like, I really believed, okay, it's over. This is not going anywhere. I felt bad. So like, I did really try to let myself be hurt by that thought that whatever is happening on the farm or wherever, this is the end, right? There's no way forward. And so the first, as in a real crisis, the first response is first, denial. No, I'm going to do this. The second response is just giving up and just letting go, and deep sorrow and pain. And then you come out the other side and you feel reborn, basically. So the end feeling was that of liberation, of really being reborn as somebody entirely different.
I'm just laughing because I remember that your character taking off his trousers and swinging them around his head as the craft crash landed into the farm, and that kind of that like acceptance, and like, because I remember my monk kind of, where before was a kind of almost like a self-flagellating, self-abusive, just pure pain creature that had stitched his own mouth shut, and like it was pretty, I don't know, that's where my whatever was going on for me was on the day that we came up with the monks. But mine ended up sitting by the lake, speaking and feeding the ducks. And that, I think that's how I would probably like to be able to respond to a crisis. You know, like okay, well, it's all over, but I'm just going to enjoy the simple things. And so that I suppose that's kind of what I was trying to get at with the question, which was like, would you be happy with that kind of response to I mean, maybe it's a silly question, but you know, if what we're saying is true, which is that this process helps us get to know ourselves better, then there's a question of, well, are we happy with what we find?
I'm extremely happy. I'm extremely happy because the interesting thing is that you sort of, step away from yourself and realize what you can actually do is you can see yourself in the complete picture, right? And the persona sort of suggests I have a certain role in the complete picture, like as a character does in a play. So there's certain, types of characters, and they're like set on a train track. And because they have these characteristics, you already know that somewhere down the road, either they're going to have problems, so there will be a conflict, or, whatever, or, oh, this is an interesting character to follow, Sherlock Holmes, because it's going to be interesting to see how it's going to figure that problem out, so, but they're all like, yeah, again, they're like these trains on tracks until they hit the wall, right? So, and then this cathartic moment happens where they have to really rethink themselves and say, even Sherlock Holmes has to say, well, maybe I'm not as bright as I thought I was, right? Maybe I need to solve this problem differently. And the
It's
first
kind of
step
hero's
being
journey
in
stuff,
the liminal
right?
world is somehow, yeah, you realize, okay, you're part of this ensemble where your persona, your characteristics present themselves. But when the crisis comes and it sort of like shifts, you sort of see like, maybe my contribution in solving the crisis is quite different from what I thought I should do in a crisis. So maybe what was really great for me to see is maybe my contribution is not to know the answer. Maybe my contribution is to laugh and have fun, and so that people again have hope, or ideas start to bubble up, and so that's my contribution, right? So that perhaps other people also might feel, well, this is not as bad as it seems. If he's laughing, if he's enjoying himself, it can't be that bad. So maybe there's a solution for that, and maybe they come up with the solution. So I don't know, it just seemed like you were observing yourself like in a play, and you realize suddenly, okay, this guy still has a contribution, but it's different from what he usually contributes towards solving a problem. And it's more now, this is more, has become more important. Again, with the setting of being part of this film production crew, it was the same thing. So my guy was just laughing all the time and having a great time and contributing to the general hilarity and party situation and all that. So, and I realized just looking on from the outside, that's also meaningful. Sometimes it's just, that means also something if you can, brighten the mood and inspire others to enjoy the moment, then that's also a thing. So for me, that was really very interesting.
Yeah, because that was also the one where we stacked all the different contexts up, wasn't it? Because the other thing that comes to mind was it Heather's, or I can't remember whether it was Heather's or mine. And the reason why I'm saying I can't remember whether it was Heather's or mine was because I think occupied her character a few weeks later. So, but there was the fan, wasn't there? And she was, she took the end of the show really very to heart. And because that's the other thing as we're discussing this now, is that there was a a number of different responses were kind of laid out, weren't they? And because we were playing multiple characters across multiple contexts, we probably also got to experience a few different responses to crisis, potential responses to crisis. And it was nice witnessing all of your guys' responses as well, you know. Because yeah, it's like a plethora of options, isn't it? It's like, you know, which was really nice. I wanted, another one of the things I wanted to just like double click on was this thing about role play and why people often find it really kind of weird. Because yes, as a teacher, it's a thing that I've tried, and I personally can't recall ever making it work properly. And I think a lot of that's, and I think a lot of that's about this. There's almost, and it could just be to do with the setting, like you know, being a teacher or a lecturer in a setting with students. There's this kind of stress on their part about trying to get something right, like they're supposed to respond in a certain way. The beauty of what we're doing is this open-endedness and the freedom to just, whatever the kind of character, whatever the character wants to do is the thing that will happen. You know, if the character wants to stop being I don't know, you know, I'm imagining a situation where a teacher might be trying to teach someone how to sell a product on a business course or something, right? In what we're doing, the salesperson might turn into a frog, or might grow silly hair, or might become the product and demonstrate the product by turning into the product. And these are all options, like wacky options that aren't available in kind of traditional role-playing settings, because it's, again, it's back to this, well, there's a category, there's a box around this, around a standard role play, and there's a right and a wrong, and there's a correct way to be, and you need to become a character that's been given to you rather than allow a character to come to you.
I just want to add something. I just want to jump in there because this is a good example, actually, what you mentioned in terms of the salesperson. And I'm sure like there's a lot of exercises where people like train some sort of sales situation. And I'm also pretty sure, I just want to also repeat what you said, and I've made the same experiences, that these role plays don't really work. And I've had the same experience, although I've also trained actors a lot. And but no, role plays for people who are not actors, and even for actors, to be very honest, role plays also for actors are not easy. So for people who are dealing with this professionally, to get the character right and authentic, I mean, they train years to do that. And now you throw people into a room and they're supposed to do this in 2 hours. It can only end in frustration. And it has, I think you put it really nicely in saying it's sort of like you give people a box and you say, okay, now get into the box and pretend you're a giraffe. And it just, how is that gonna, like, I don't know why it's so difficult, but it is difficult. And what is astonishing here is that there's none of that difficulty. And you would basically, what you would do is, okay, you would create a metaphorical world around the sales situation, said, okay, if this sales situation would be X, Y, and Z, what would it be? And you would start inhabiting that world and start role-playing in that world and deriving some experience you can then use actually in the sales situation. It sounds banal, but that's how it would be. You would take away that experience and say, oh, I could, you know, try this kind of behavior. It could help me do whatever I'm doing. I just wanted to add also that what is very strange, because I always was also part, not always, I also did some family constellations work, right? Not me personally, but I participated in that. And I found it interesting that there, where they also work with sort of like a role play situation by which people are ascribed certain characters or family members, people tend not to freeze up that much, right? There's also more, and it seems to be that it's as if they are within that work situation also stepping into liminal space. Because they're not getting any box. They're just saying, okay, you're the father now, or you're the husband. That's all.
Right. Yeah.
You're not given any information beyond that usually. And then you just say, and then you're being told, okay, just do whatever you want to do. Because it's the other way around. So the information comes out, and then that is deemed relevant, right? So you're not given the information and asked to conform to that information and to represent that information. You're being told whatever information comes up at that moment, words, behavior, actions, that's the father. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about if that is the actual father. We're just going to take that, and that's the father. Even if you don't want to say anything, that's also the father.
Yeah.
So I think there's a slight, let's say, relatedness to what we're doing, although what we're doing is, family constellation, sometimes it's very difficult to say, well, whatever came up, was that now you, or was it the father? What came up there? What was going on? Nobody really knows. It's deemed beneficial, all right, for mysterious reasons, for unknown reasons. But here, it's up to you to decide if the information you gain is relevant for yourself. It's slightly less mysterious, I think, this process. It's not so, yeah.
Almost because there isn't the same level of expectation that that the information be there isn't the same level of expectation that the information be relevant.
Oh, yeah.
It's almost like you're setting up from the beginning. Well, we could just be getting together and having some fun,
right?
And 1 week that might be the case. You're just kind of having a laugh, and it's not particularly profound, and it's not particularly, I mean, that's that language. You're just having a laugh. That's my little that's my little persona, maybe appearing, but it could be just that 1 week, but then the next week it could be, this feels really deep and really meaningful, and there's the flexibility of that, I think, is perhaps an important part of why it kind of works, is because it is also quite soft if you want it to be, that thing about there's a quote, is it Bruce Lee, where he talks about how the water responds exactly as it needs to the pebble. There's something about what we're doing which is a bit like that, which is you go in, you have the experience, and whatever you take from it is totally fine. That's the right thing. If it's not much, if it's just a bit of fun with some friends, great. If it's deep, profound, nearly therapy or some spiritual work, that's also great and fine. And that freedom is an important part of it, I think. Yeah.
And a certain degree of agency. I just remembered again with family constellation, one of the problem is if you stand in for the father, you don't know the father, right? You can have an experience, but what I find also a little bit dissatisfying is that, well, is that now the father? Is it? Who knows? But you don't have any relationship to the father of somebody who, of somebody else doing the constellation. Whereas what you're describing is you can make these decisions for that yourself, because you can say, is that relevant for me? Was it profound? Was it fun? But you're the one making the connections, right? And it's not in standing in for somebody else, representing somebody else, and having an experience for somebody else, where Okay, it might have been important, but what does it mean for yourself? It's anyway, that's I just wanted to point that out.
Mm.
You're the one giving things orientation, and you know it within the liminal world. You know, that's the whole point. Yeah.
Liminal orientation. That
Liminal
feels new.
orientation.
I
I like
like
that.
that. That's good, Luke.
I like that.
Yeah, because this has also been another really fun part of the process, which is kind of trying to come up with names for the things that we discover ourselves doing, you know, or like new. That's also been that's also been a fun part of the process. You know, name, you know, whatever metaphorical thinking is, deciding that that's what it's to be called, you know, and then we all know what we're talking about when we're talking about it. That's another really valuable thing that I found anyway, to be honest, is the which right. And now I'm getting links personally to the notion of the poetic world, which is this sense of trying to live out art, everything being a creative act. And something that feels like another thing that feels really vital to me was this fact that we were making this thing for ourselves, and the degree to which anyone else should try this stuff. I think the group themselves making the discoveries about the process is an important part. You know, that the sitting around and going, well, what are we going to do today? Well, we know it's kind of based on art, and it's kind of based on trying to shed conceptualizing and philosophizing and linearizing. But apart from that, it's up to us to do what we do. And
there's this whole idea of autopoiesis, no? This
auto, yeah, that's another one of our little, yeah,
the like the self-creating world, and which is inherently meaningful. And there seems to be something to that, because in a weird way, every session was meaningful, right? Even, let's say, if at best it was enjoyable, that was also meaningful. So there was this aspect of that we as humans have that ability to continuously create meaning. So to have that autopoetic mind, which is able to do that.
Yeah.
And therefore also have the experience of a poetic world and to infer meaning into all things around us. So it's just that we are at times, again, removed from that ability, but
yeah. And this is, I'm feeling in me like a kind of little excitement as we're talking about this, because I think it's one of the, where we were talking about persona and like sitting within a box and showing up with a certain mask on, or wearing it, you know, with a certain face, or one of the things that I think we were seeking to do for ourselves, and perhaps maybe, I don't know, I have, you know, to the extent that I have wishes about, you know, changing the world, one of them is that the world gets a little bit more of this, which are these little discovery moments or self-created moments where, you know, it's not just moving through the world copying what other people have done all the time. It's now quite often we might discover something for ourselves which someone else has thought of, right? You know, we've already talked about Jung today, and how some of the things that we've been doing, and when we reflect upon it, remind us of some of his work. But you know, there'll be heaps of others as well. Like Steiner was another name that came up. And sure, they may well have discovered it all then, but that doesn't mean that we didn't also discover it for ourselves. And that little moment of the light bulb going off, or the joint, the connection between two things that were previously separate, or the discovery or the uncovering of that little thing, that little piece, or the creation of the piece of music. So, you know, or poetry, or, you know, whatever it is, which links back to this artistic piece, and always trying to look at the world artistically. There's real value in remembering that. Okay, it's like a kind of, there's a kind of child's world way of looking at things. You know, it's like when a child learns to walk, just because loads of other humans are walking and have been for however long we've been walking for, doesn't mean it isn't miraculous that child is now walking where a few weeks ago they couldn't. And that those little moments of creation where we discover something fresh for us, we forget them sometimes in old age. And you know, it can happen in academia sometimes, right? There's a requirement on academics, because this is what academics do, to cite everybody else that said the same thing that you're saying, you know. And it's almost like if you don't cite, you know, if you don't have a bibliography as long as your arm, then you know, you're I don't know, like you're a thief almost, or you're and that, I think, is actually, whilst there's a lot of rigor in that, and what's the word? So there's rigor and discipline and quote unquote hard work in all of that. What can get lost, well, and what often does, is the moment that the thinker makes that discovery for themselves. It's also, at the risk of going off on a totally different tangent, feels linked to the problems that come along with say or that can come along with dogma, or tight religious definitions of things. It's like the text can always be rediscovered, and kind of squashing that rediscovery out of life renders it dead somehow. At least for me, where I'm at right now. And I know that because as we're talking about autopoesis and the poetic world and the kind of child, I'm getting little tingles and like, yes, you know, kind of sensation.
Yeah, it does really give you hope, because it's also very simple. Now, I was just thinking about Boyce, and that he said every human being is an artist. And when we started off, I said, no, not everybody is an artist. You know, that's somebody throwing that out there. But now I agree. Yeah, I agree with Boyce, because of our journey, that part of our mind is essentially highly artistic. And we know that from neuroscience. And I know that this discussion has been around a lot, and you read about that and then you go like, yeah, so what? You know, I mean, and then, well, what does that mean now? I have to sit down and do some paintings or play some music or, you know, go to a workshop and do some dancing to. So people, when they read that, they go like, okay, the mind is artistic, or Boy says every human being is an artist. But it's much more simpler than that. You don't have to do any of those things to discover this quality within you, right? So that's the beauty of it. You just sit together with other people and you start to activate the metaphorical, symbolic workings of your mind. And you just give it a little bit space and patience, and it'll start all by itself. And there it is. It's all there. Maybe there's sometimes good reasons not to live in that world, and that's also good. But I agree with you. This is the area of the mind which, you know, infuses things, what you do with meaning. So would you like to experience more meaning? Well, then perhaps this is something very simple to do, right? And you don't even have to learn how to draw. Because even I was even asking myself when we did, okay, we worked on metaphor and we worked also on symbolic thinking. I want to get back to that also because of C.G. Jung. But what I noticed then, well, where's song? Where's rhythm? And where is it? It's in the metaphorical world. Like I sat at home sometimes doing my symbolic thinking, and I was just giving the, you know, the images some words and some song as they emerged, and they were singing.
Yeah.
So it's the music's there. It just comes. The music just comes, and I don't know where it comes from. I don't know what tune it is. It doesn't really matter. So there is something which wants to sing.
Yeah.
It's as simple as that. And you don't have to learn to be a singer. You don't have to like music.
Okay, I'm having.
It's just there.
I'm struggling with that, but I would, because again, because so much of my persona is tied up with music. But
no, but I mean, like, you don't have to be a music lover, or, you know classical music and or have certain preferences. No, that really matters.
I'm posing like my own kind of path on the thing, and I shouldn't, because you're right.
It's just there, just like the images are there without you being a painter or a sculptor.
Yeah.
It's just the mind wants to express itself, at least at that level, within those with those means. Which, what did you say? Liminal gives it liminal direction.
You said it, and I can't
okay,
remember. We're gonna have to go back because it was good.
Yeah, because there's something important. I think that the other day I thought, well, the metaphorical world is something which gives you direction, but it doesn't give you the literal. You shouldn't take it literal, but you can look at it to give you some direction.
It's gestural.
But it would be a mistake to take it literal in a oh, this is happening in the metaphorical world, or this is, so now I don't need to do the same in the actual world. So you got to be aware of that, and take it more like a like a hint, perhaps.
Yeah. There isn't a one-to-one relationship, and yes, that's I just said it just before. There's a which is another artistic thing. There's a gesture towards, or it's a symbol, or it's a metaphor for. It isn't the same as the real thing. Now there are some people, of course, that argue that real things aren't the same as the real thing, and you can get into kind of whether through philosophy or quantum, quantum physics or whatever, you get into all of that. But the other danger with this stuff is this which, it could be a danger for people with perhaps severe mental illness. But yeah, looking out for going into the metaphorical place, seeing it, and then expecting that to be the same as the real world. Now, I also want to kind of almost contradict what we've just said about them not being the same thing, because during the past 12 months, there's been a kind of exploration of this stuff, like in the real world. I remember you had that moment where you slip on a lake and fell into the water.
Mm-hmm.
And there was this, to get back to Jung, maybe there was a kind of synchronous, that event happening in your quote unquote real life felt synchronous with some of the stuff that was going on on the group chat. I remember that there being a lot, there was some meaning around that. And there were also moments, I think, where Heather had moments in real life where she would walk up to, there was some like book exchange shelf or something, and we'd had some stuff going on in one of these sessions, and then there'd been we'd been messaging back and forth with each other, and then she'd gone to this bookshelf, and then there was a book that was almost not perfectly fit the situation, but that really jumped out to her as like, oh, this is exactly the right thing for now. Given everything that we'd all been discussing together, and given like where she was at, my natural, I'm saying natural, a response of mine in the past would have been, okay, this is too woo-woo, it's going too far, but at the very least, there's something fun with toying with this stuff, right? Which is seeing kind of where the links are between what's going on in the metaphorical world and the other games that we've been playing. Where the links are in all of that with what's going on in our everyday lives, and allowing for a little bit of cross dissemination. Feels also quite important, but this is the thing, it's liminal, right? It's the between place. We're not saying you can go into the metaphorical world, have this experience, and then just expect to take the whole thing and just live with it in your real life somehow. But at the same time, we're certainly not saying that there's no point even doing any metaphorical thinking or doing any of the type of play that we've been doing, because it's not quote unquote real. We're definitely not saying that either. There's this, which I think to me seems linked with this poetic world, which is that there's this kind of place where the imagination, the symbolism, the spiritual, the allowing of the unconscious, or wherever that comes from, allowing that to be seen, there is space in the real world to move some of that. There's a kind of there's a place where it links, and there's
Oh,
a crossover,
absolutely.
and I suppose it moves from the kind of maybe the depth, the sea, the subconscious, up and through and onto the land, into the real world, into the nuts and bolts. Here's a table, I can see it, feel it, place.
No, absolutely. I mean, the least of that being, I would say the let's say the lowest kind of utility you would have it from a direct utility is that you, again, it's this issue of remembering and remembering what's important to me. And in a deep emotional, subconscious, liminal way that you become very aware of what's important to you. And again, I've tested this out in a coaching process, and it helps people enormously and rapidly to get back to that point where I would argue you might need dozens of coaching hours to get to that point. It's just like this.
Like a remembering of the actually what's important.
What's important? What do I really care about? What is presented to me when I ask a certain question? And it's very rapid. And I did this just also as an example with a client. As you start any relationship, any work relationship, you don't really know the other person. What is she interested in? What's going on? You talk a lot, but is that person really interested in these things, or is it just a neurotic expression of something? And then you start to ask, okay, let's look at our coaching relationship. If our coaching relationship was XYZ, what would it be? In this particular case, it was a journey to a city. All right. So the client said, I am on this journey to this city, and I meet you in a forest. He was talking about me. And I said, okay, I'm in this forest. Yeah, I can see myself in this forest. I'm sitting in the forest. I don't want to be bothered by anybody. And then you come along. And actually, I'm a little bit bothered. I told him also, I'm a little bit bothered by you. You're disturbing my peace. I'm meditating in the forest. And then you ask me to come with you on this journey.
What comes up though, right? And it's an imaginary world, so that you've got that kind of. Sorry to just throw in like the kind of the boring, like, let's explain it piece, but that thing of you being able to say that, and it's in an imaginary world, means that you're not saying to him, oh, I'd rather not be doing coaching with you today. That isn't what's being said. And yet you're able to test out how is he going to react to somebody who's feeling in that way, feeling that way. And so there's like a looseness to the whole thing. Sorry,
right.
I'm going to keep doing this if that's okay.
There's a playfulness to it where you might step out of it and say, what did you just say? Or you stay within the metaphorical world and you respond to it in some way, which he did. And he said,
yeah,
well, I show you that I, have some tricks, and I can, I can like whittle a flute from a piece of bark and play some music, and this interests you.
Yeah.
I said, that is interesting.
Yeah.
And then I asked you, why don't you join me on my journey? And as I sit in the forest, I go like, yeah, I always wanted to go to this city once in my life. I remember now. So I become interested, and I join him on his journey to that city. And in that world, I then ask him, but why do you want me to join you on this journey? Right? And I ask him in the metaphorical world, and he says, well, in case I get distracted, because there's always so many interesting things on the way to that city. Maybe we meet a farmer and we stay a couple of days there, and I help him in his garden. And maybe after staying 4 or 5 days, you become impatient and remind me that we need to go to the city. And so we did this one session, and it was very interesting. And for me, afterward, it was clear as daylight what my relationship to this client was.
Mm.
And one of the main aspects of my relationship was to remind him where we're going and not to forget what the end game is here. Like, we're not going to look at every detail and not spend, too much time on distractions and so on and so forth, which he pointed out to me in the metaphorical world. I get distracted. I see something interesting, something shiny. I want to play with it. I go to a farmer and help him with his cows because it's fun.
Yeah.
And you remind me, hey, we got to still go to the city. And what was really interesting, because you were saying, does the metaphorical have implications on the actual? Well, yes, it did, because
Mm.
in a session, a couple of sessions later, he came with some problem, right? He said, this guy really bothered me, da, 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 or something happened there, and I want to talk about that. And I said, why? What's the whole point of that? That's not why we're here. We're here to do your thing to get to the city. And he said, you're right. And later again, the feedback was, I really appreciated that, because we don't have a lot of time, and you always reminded me on what is my mission here in my job, right? My mission in this job here is X, Y, and Z. It's not to deal with
Right.
that problem. It's not to deal with that problem. It's not to deal with that problem. All of that is just shiny stuff around me, and I can spend a lot of time on that shiny stuff, hours and days, but I don't get one step further towards the golden city, right? So within one session, I could clarify our relationship and see what was important to him, but through the metaphorical, which would probably, I would need hours to figure this out. What does he really want from me?
Yeah.
How can I really
And,
benefit him in this situation? So
and the other thing with that as well is you don't need to know any details about what his mission in work even is. Right? He knows all of that. Yeah. So all you need to say is, we need to get to the city. And for him, that the city means whatever it meant for him, which is presumably this job that he had to do, and all of the intricate details that are associated with that. But you don't need to know all that. All you need to do is just remind him, we're going to the city. So that there's something about the fact it is in the imaginary that means you're not getting all up in his business. It's still his job to do in the real world.
yeah, right.
Right. And yet you can still interact with it. So again, it's that, there's a kind of boundary, isn't there, between, it's quite a safe boundary between the participants in this stuff. And they can be really useful to each other without, I'm trying to think, kind of without breaking the real world for them by accident, because they think they like a coach might think they understand an industry, for example, and so because of that give all sorts of advice that's not actually linked or related to that individual's journey, where they're at in their life. And the fact that there is this world helps really protect against that, doesn't it?
That's part of it, and I would even argue it goes a little bit further in terms of asking, what kind of experience do you want to have in your work, right? So moving away from what are your obligations, what do you need to do, as you pointed out, all the technical issues, and going back to this question of experience. And that's an interesting question to ask the other person, because many people don't even ask this themselves anymore, to say, what kind of experience do I want to have?
Yeah.
And once you ask that question is central, right, to everything. And if you're not having this experience which you would like to have, or to such a degree that it's minimal, well, you're in trouble. You're in big trouble, because you're just going to hold out, that much longer. in terms of having the energy to go to work and do whatever you're doing. But asking that question can also have can have the counter effect of seeking out opportunities for that experience. To say, maybe my job gives me more opportunities of that kind of experience than I thought of up to now.
Yeah.
And so how could I structure my work in such a way to have more of that? Because that's where I feel most alive. That's where I feel the most creative. That's where I feel the most effective. That's where I have that kind of experience. So how do I get more of that and less of the other stuff? And once you own this, I think a lot of good things can happen to you in your work. And then people go like, yeah, but what about people around me? And then I always go like, but they're also better off, because you're going to do much more for them, and they're going to see you having that experience, and they're going to benefit from that.
Yeah.
They're gonna like, this is going to be good for others as well. So
yeah.
So and I was lucky to work with clients who sort of got it and said, okay, yeah. Yes,
Yeah.
that's exactly that's the main point. So I got to restructure my work in a certain way to have more of that, because that's where I'm my best.
Yeah. And it's almost like, right, there's something about the metaphorical world shunting reality out of the way. Right. So like the nuts and bolts, oh, I've got to get to this meeting, or I've got to do that, or I need all this technical knowledge, or I've got to present this, I've got to give this presentation, or, whatever it is. There's something about the metaphorical world that just shoves all of that crap out the way. And so you're left looking at yourself through a totally different lens, which means that in some ways, the more real shit, right? Like the where do I find meaning, right? And what are the things, how, a question, how do I know when I'm really feeling happy and and fulfilled and whole and remembered, right? Where do I feel that, or how do I get the meaning in my life? It's almost like that's all you're kind of left with, right? Because the imaginary world is just that. It's an imaginary world. And you know that because you're playing, you're engaging in the game and you're playing the game. But then the kind of the deeper stuff, like the felt sensation, the emotions that you want to experience, and not just as standalone events either, like, because there's a sense of story, the structure of those events, right? So like, right, just as an example, maybe you're the kind of person that really likes to solve problems. Of course, there's a narrative to that, right? Which is, there needs to be, the first stage is discovering the problem, right? And in a story, that might be, I don't know. Well, it happens in stories all the time, right? Some problem emerges, and then the problem is solved and fixed, and then everything's fine again. So actually, enjoying problem solving is a kind of quite typical narrative structure. But if you aren't into problem solving, but you're into some other thing that has some sort of narrative structure, like there are a set of events that need to occur one after the other, or a set of emotions or affects that need to unfold over time, you can also explore all of that in the world as well. Problem solving actually is like a little mini hero's journey, isn't it? But there's all sorts of things that give us meaning in a number of different ways, and you can discover them in this world. Yeah.
It sort of like points us towards the ability to to experience meaning, and to connect that and to connect it to the outside world, and to say, as you say, the interesting part is the metaphorical world can sort of like just emerge, be there, and shunt away the reality and show you something. And then it's up to you how you want to respond to it. And if you want to, listen to it, and yeah, how you want to integrate that. And yeah, sort of and what I could say is that it does help you to create or live out your narrative, let's put it that way, to become aware that it even exists.
Yep.
Which isn't easy. And I always thought, well, that's also something which actually has resolved itself through these 12 months, because at the beginning I was going like, well, narrative exists and it's a meaning-making structure, right? So basically what we do through that, as you call it, problem solving or decision making, is somehow a narrative structure. We constantly build our existence into the future through certain choices, and that's a narrative structure. But it's very difficult to, again, see it clearly like a persona, right? It's difficult to, although we're somehow aware of that, it's difficult to look at it and become aware of that. And the metaphorical world certainly helps us to become aware of it very rapidly. And as we talked about, it can have also immediate consequences, again, on your decision making, if you take it, maybe not literally, but symbolically.
Yeah, what do we,
like, as I did, I made a decision. I said, this is serious stuff. I am going to point always to the Golden City. Yeah, but without taking it too literally in terms of pointing to an actual city.
Yes.
Saying we have to find an actual city and both of us have to go there now. That would be taking it literally. So you have to take it symbolically and say, well, what is this city? And in this way, yes, you can infer some meaning and also some decisions from that.
Yeah.
And today we didn't get around to talking much about Jung. I just know.
No.
We got sort of sidetracked. And
I think that's
we
the way it
didn't
must
we
be.
didn't even get to symbolism, symbolic thinking.
No.
Yeah.
Well.
So I don't know if I'll have to pick that up next time around. I still want to get to that point of symbols and symbolic thinking and this whole alchemy stuff.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Well,
and maybe next time.
We can do that next time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, thanks a lot.
All right.
I really enjoyed that. And
same here. It's yeah. I'm going to say it again. I'll probably say it every single time, but it's really nice doing this, like looking back over and discussing it this way, looking back over what we've been doing. I'm finding it really, really valuable. So yeah, thanks.
And time for Liminal Academy.
Let's do it. Yes.
Okay, so talk to you next time.
All right. See you later. Bye-bye.